Hey everyone, today I have with me Carrie. She is a lifelong Quaker, and I brought her on because she's willing to talk about the patriarchal structures of the Quakers, which I thought would be an interesting topic. But before we get into that, thank you for coming on, Carrie. And I wanted to ask, how did you end up finding my channel?
Well, it started out with my sister-in-law.
Hmm.
She has a daughter who became engaged to a MGTOW man, and we had no idea what exactly that was. And she is more within the community than I am, and she doesn't venture outside of the community as much as I do. So she asked me to help her research that. So we sat down together on my computer and we began looking up videos to learn about this man.
Okay, and then you stumbled on, I assume you stumbled on like Red Pill, Pickup Artists, and then eventually found my channel, something like that?
Exactly.
Hmm. Okay, and you're watching this to. It started by um, your relative needing help to understand this outsider, and for people who don't know, like when you first were in my comment section, you mentioned that you were a Quaker. I was picturing the Amish, but that's not actually how you guys live. Could you give a general idea of um, how Quakers are? You don't drive around in buggies all day.
No, we definitely don't drive around in buggies all day. There are as many different types of Quakers as there are people. It used to be in the olden days that all Quakers were Christians. Nowadays, there are so many different types of Quakers that some Quakers are not even Christians. There are non-theist Quakers, primarily out in California. There are evangelical Quakers. There are so many different categories of Quakers. There is there is such a difference between the groups of Quakers because primarily they were out in the country and they didn't get a lot of time to really mix and communicate. So different structures and different groups did different things in different ways. And there was actually breaks in the church which caused divisions, and some groups have remained as they were with those divisions, and some groups have actually come back together. It just depends on which church you're a part of and which group you were with.
Hmm. And so you've lived in a Quaker community your whole life, but obviously you have access to technology. You must have access to a computer because you've watched my channel and other channels as well. So technology isn't off limits. Do you guys have technology restrictions for what you can use?
Quakers have all technology.
Hmm.
We can use any technology that's out there that exists, but
Hmm.
we teach that we have to have a responsibility with the technology.
Hmm.
So oftentimes within homes, there are limits as to what technologies can be used when and for what purposes. But we have automobiles, we have, TVs, we
Hmm.
have every electronic that you can think of, we have. And we, of course, do drive cars. We some groups of Quakers are kind of like the Amish in the way they dress.
Okay.
Some wear plain dress clothing, and they are called it's called plain dress Christian clothing. I am from one of those groups that does wear that clothing, but I don't wear that clothing all the time because I am in a unique position. But the majority of Quakers out there would look like anybody else. They wouldn't wear the Christian plain dress, and you would see them as just an average person.
Okay. So that is something that you mentioned before that's unique about you is that even though you were born and raised as a Quaker, you actually married outside the Quaker community.
Yes.
And why'd you do that?
Well, I was put in a situation where I was matched with somebody. Unfortunately, the match didn't work, and I found myself in a situation to where I was alone. And I was at college, and I was wearing the plain dress clothing, and a gentleman noticed me, and he started to kind of look at me and bump into me here and there, but I didn't really know who he was. But he must have decided that he liked me enough because he learned about me and he learned about us, and he made arrangements to come out to our community and to talk with my father and to meet everyone. So from there, that's how things progressed.
Right. So you have a you have kind of one step or one foot in each world, the Quaker world, and then the Amish will call us the English world. But do you have a name for the world outside of the Quaker sphere?
We don't really have a word for it. We pretty much say that we live in the world, but we are not of the world. Meaning that we live in the technology, and a lot of us live intermixed with other people that wouldn't even know that we were Quaker. But we are not of the trappings of the world. We live a very simple life. We don't like a lot of material possessions. We like to remember the true purpose of things, the true meaning of things. And in that way, our focus is more with our community and more with our faith.
And do you have your own churches?
Yes, but we don't call them churches.
Oh.
We call them meeting halls. So we go to the meeting hall for service or worship. The services are as different as the Quakers. Some Quakers, you go into the meeting halls and there are stained glass windows, and it's a very kind of evangelical sermon given by a minister. That is not the type of Quaker I am. I'm from a group that does unstructured worship or silent worship. So when we walk into the meeting hall, men go in one door, women go in the other door, and there's a division, and you sit down and it's silent. There's no minister.
Okay.
Each person can stand up and say whatever they want, and others can add to it, or there can be total silence, or somebody else can stand up and say something different. It's led by the community and not a minister.
Okay. And what do Quakers do for a living? How do they earn income?
My group of Quakers were poor farmers in the beginning, and there were a lot of smaller farms. Now, there are kind of more acreages, and people also work outside of the farms. Most of the Quakers I know are college educated. Many have graduate degrees. Many have doctorate degrees. And many earn incomes in technology or the automotive industry. A lot of people work within computers, science, technology, those fields.
So is this the men and the women go off to college and get degrees and become engineers or whatever?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the women are also educated. Even though you have a patriarchal structure, the women are also highly educated?
Yes. Quakers value education and truth above many things. So all kids, whether they're male or female, are encouraged to learn as much as they can and go to school. Education is very prized, and it is something that's not denied to anyone.
That seems kind of surprising since you still live under a patriarchal structure. I would have thought that like the women would not have been educated, but obviously there's different types of patriarchies, and that's the main thrust of the call today. Is the patriarchal structure, and you'd sent me an email about that. And did you want to start talking about how that works, or should I just ask you questions?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
Either way.
Okay.
I guess I always thought that the way I grew up was pretty common sense and pretty much the way everybody grew up. It never dawned on me that people did things differently. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
If you don't mind. When you talk, you confuse me a little bit because you talk about your upbringing and you have kind of a military background of family history.
Yes,
so
my father was in the military.
So I would think that would give you kind of a patriarchal structure. But then you talk about the area that you grew up, there was a lot of liberal feminists. So I get confused about what was your structure of growing up, or did you have one that you realized, or how did that work?
There wasn't really I don't think of it as being too formal of a structure. Now, my father was career U.S. Army. He joined when he was 19. He retired, I don't remember how old he was. He was pretty old when he retired from the U.S. Army. But he didn't. I'm sure he brought home some of it with him. However, if you had come over my house back like when I was in middle school or high school, you wouldn't have found a bunch of Army things everywhere. There would have been a couple things on the wall that, like he framed his commission when he became an officer. He framed a few of the awards he had gotten. That would have told you that he was in the military, but it wasn't like there was camouflage and rifles everywhere or anything like that. So it wasn't. It was a part of our life, but it wasn't. It wasn't a constant part of it. We didn't. We never lived on base. We always lived out in the civilian world. But the area I grew up in, I grew up about an hour east of Washington D.C. in the Maryland area. So it's a very blue state. A lot of liberals and feminists there. So, and my mother was a stay-at-home housewife. So there was contrast for me to see between the liberal feminist world versus the world that my private home world. Although both my parents, when they were young, they were Democrats up until Reagan. Then they switched parties to Republican and became a bit more conservative as they got older. But I guess compared to you and the world you're used to, I guess my parents would be considered very liberal. So some of that might just be like a sliding scale of contrast. But as far as structure goes, I'm trying to think. I don't think there. I mean, there were rules I had to follow, as a kid, but I doubt it was as structured as the world that you grew up in. And on a lot of things, my father would have been the. I don't want to say he was the final authority on things, but it probably depended on the topic of what was being decided upon. Because there was a lot of times where my mother and father made joint decisions. As far as I'm aware, my mother managed the money in the household. I mean, I don't know all of what went on behind the scenes because I was young. And like when they went to buy houses, that was a joint decision, at least as far as I'm aware, between my mother and father.
So it wasn't more of a discussion of this is how it is or this is how it will be. It was just more freeform?
Yeah, a bit more freeform. Like I said, there were some hard rules. Like I never got into drugs, but if I had, they probably would have put their foot down. I never drank when I was underage, but if I had, they probably would have put their foot down. But they never really had to explicitly tell me, don't do drugs, don't drink when you're underage, that kind of thing. I just didn't do those things. But yeah, there was a lot of free form, like especially summer vacations from school. That was not very structured at all. Basically, I could do whatever I wanted all day. Yeah. That's funny that you even asked that question because I feel kind of flat-footed since they're.
Really?
Yeah, because no one's ever actually asked me that before.
Huh.
Yeah, you caught me on that one. No, you did. Because most of my education came from school. I guess there was some at home. Like before I entered kindergarten, my mother had read to me, so I could read, and I don't know if I could write, but like I could read. I knew my numbers, I knew my letters, that kind of thing. So there was some education at home, but most of my education was through schooling, not back home. And as far as like gender roles go, that was to some degree there was lines between what men do versus what women do, but at the same time, like if my mother was sick, my father would do the cooking and the laundry because my mother was sick. That someone had to do the cooking and the laundry and the cleaning, so my father would do it. Same thing with cooking. It's kind of funny because my mother would do the daily meals, but when it came to pastries, that would be my father making cakes. Or at Christmas time, my father makes a variety of cookies. So growing up as a kid, I learned, okay, mom cooks the regular meals, but dad makes the treats. Or at Christmas time, the father's the one that makes the cookies, not the mother, because my mother didn't really participate in that. Now, why was it that way? I don't know. I think my father just enjoyed doing that kind of thing around Christmas time. So I know that usually cooking is considered, or even baking is considered more of a girl thing to do, I guess. But in my household, and it wasn't really like that. I think a lot of a lot of the way that kind of thing was more the personal preferences of my mother and father rather than rather. I don't think they thought about it ahead of time. I don't think that they laid down any kind of rules. When Christmas time came around, my father just said, "Hey, I want to make cookies, so I'm going to make cookies." When I was a kid, he would actually take a pizza pan and make a giant chocolate chip cookie out of the pizza pan. So I would cut off slices as a kid and eat those. Um, but certain things like since my father was in the army, and I think I was 7 or 8, the first time he took me out to a rifle range and taught me how to use a firearm. My mother's never really shown interest in that kind of, or not too much interest in that kind of thing, so she never really participated. But again, that probably came down to personal preference rather than, the man is supposed to teach this. It was probably because, my father had spent his life in the army. He liked guns. This was one of his interests. Same thing with fishing or camping. Now, if my mother had been interested in those things, she's gone to the rifle range with him before, but if she had had a strong interest in things like fishing or firearms or camping, she probably would have come along with us. But she never really showed a very strong interest in that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I don't think it was I don't believe that those were formal thought out rules. Rather, it was just the personal preferences of the two individuals. One of the other things that I remember happening somewhere when I was in middle school, we had a guest family over for a dinner. And after dinner, my father and I picked up our plates and our knives and forks and our glasses, rinsed them off in the sink and put them in the dishwasher. And as I was leaving the kitchen there, or the dining area, the guest wife said, "How did you train your men to do that?" And my mother was shocked. She said, "Well, I just asked them to do it." Because apparently the visiting wife had to twist the arm of her husband and sons to get them to do something that simple. And to me and my father, it was no big deal. My mother asked us, "Hey, help me clean up after the meal," so we did. That's just. But again, this wasn't a formal rule of you have to help mom after every meal to clean up. It was just more of like an informal request that we honored. So, yeah, when I think about it, I don't think there was too much of a formal structure to my life growing up, and a lot of the rules were more the personal preferences of my mother and father rather than some type of formal system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Okay. So in your patriarchal system, I assume things were different?
Yes. There is definitely a system within our family, and within a lot of families, there's a lot of different structures around us that are religious that have similar structures, even though they aren't my faith. But a lot of them usually kind of do it the same way, that it's about the family name, and it's about the surname in particular. So everybody in the family is basically working to uplift and maintain the reputation of the surname. And of course, the surname of your father, that's the reputation. And then the eldest son, when the father dies, everything goes to the eldest son. The eldest son inherits everything. And then the eldest son gets all the responsibilities that come with that position. There's kind of a hierarchy within the structure, depending on whether you're the eldest son or a younger son. And depending on where you are in the structure kind of depends on your standing within the group. If you are the eldest son of a very, very large family with a lot of branches, then you have a lot of things to oversee. But you've probably accumulated a lot of wealth because everything has been handed down in your line to get to you. So with that great wealth comes great responsibility. Your responsibility then for overseeing that entire large family. And because you're in that position, you're given a lot of esteem within the community because you're obviously in charge of a great deal of wealth and a great group of people. So that immediately means that you're a leader.
Can you give me a specific example of a responsibility the eldest son might have?
Sure. The eldest son would have the responsibility for caring for all of the elderly relatives in the line. So if they have a great aunt or a great uncle, that's their responsibility to care for that person.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
all the elderly, because they have the money, they have the resources,
To
that
do it, right.
responsibility falls to them. Another thing would be family reunions. Family reunions are expected every year. And if you have a big family, that's a big undertaking. But his wife would then usually put together the big family reunion and have all the food, the gifts for all the family, set up the structure of the reunion, type out family histories to give to everybody. She would be the keeper of the family Bibles and maintain the family Bibles and the family histories. It would be a lot of those type of responsibilities. If there's a dispute within the family, that eldest brother would be the one responsible for solving the dispute. If somebody in the community had a problem with the family, they would come to that eldest brother, and he would be responsible for making things right.
So it sounds like it's not just a responsibility for the eldest son, but the woman that marries the eldest son also has more responsibility because she has to maintain like the family lineage. What kind of responsibilities does his
Exactly.
wife have? Oh, well, you mentioned
The
the reunion.
Yeah. And the wife would have to do the reunions. She would have to maintain the very detailed family history.
Hmm.
She would have to maintain communication with all the branches and all the lines.
Oh, wow.
It would be her responsibility to know and understand what was going on in all of these different areas. And she would be responsible for providing all of the gifts to all these different areas. And the care of the elderly not only requires money, sometimes it requires an actual caregiver.
Yeah.
So she would be that caregiver who would go and provide that care.
Right. Okay. So the eldest son would be desirable because he gets all the family wealth, but there's the counterbalance that there's a whole lot of other things that come with it. It's not just, you get to marry the rich kid. You have
Exactly.
So some women might not want that, I would think. Is that right?
Well, yes. Some families, when creating a match, want the eldest son because they want the most resources for their daughter. Some families, when creating a match, want a younger sibling when they create a match for their daughter because that means she'll have less responsibility and she'll be able to come home and see her side of the family more.
Oh, so
there are
the wife's
advantages
eldest
to that.
son doesn't get to interact with her own family as much.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So how do Quakers do the matching?
Well, again, that depends on the group of Quakers you're with.
Okay, well, how about your
It's different
group?
for different Quakers.
Right.
In the olden days, my group was just Quakers,
Mm-hmm.
and they had more freedom. They could kind of meet somebody young, and the families would approve, and then they would go through kind of the courtship rituals.
What would make a family
After,
disapprove a match when the young people decided?
if there was a bad reputation within the
Okay.
family, if there was some ideas of discrepancies in religious beliefs, if there was disrespect shown between the families in any way, shape, or form, if the couples didn't seem to get along in the way that they should get along to be a married couple,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things would play into it. But couples were always spoken to and given counsel
Mm-hmm.
and given direction through a courtship process, so that by the wedding day, everybody was sure.
Right. What does the courtship process look like?
Well, again, that depends.
Well, your group.
In my situation, in my group, things changed a lot
Mm-hmm.
because our group was very small.
Okay.
So because our group was very small, anytime you have a small group of people, at some point you become painfully aware of the founder effect.
Okay.
And the founder effect basically, are you familiar with it, I guess?
Yeah, that the direction the founder sets things in stays for a long time even after the founder's left. Something like
Kind
that.
of. In genetic terms, if you're talking about the founder effect in genetic terms,
Mm-hmm.
Ernst Mayr came up with this idea that if you have a small group of people and you put them together, that no matter what you do, the genetics are going to overlap in such a way that there's going to be issues and problems. And unfortunately, I'm in a small enough group that has existed long enough that we have become aware of the founder effect.
Oh, really?
So,
You're having genetic problems?
yes,
Oh.
yes. Primarily, the genetic problem that we primarily have in our group is a blood disorder.
Oh.
And it primarily runs in females.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a blood clotting disorder where the blood clots too much too quickly.
Oh.
Kind of the reverse of hemophilia.
Mm-hmm.
And it has caused a great deal of problems. There are a lot of communities that struggle with genetic disorders. So for any of your listeners out there who are looking for girls in these type of communities, I would suggest, going and looking up the different disorders that can occur in the different groups.
Mm-hmm.
There's a database called the Amish, Mennonite, and Hutterite Genetic Disorder Database.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And it was created up in Canada. So for anyone who is a part of these groups or looking to be a part of these groups, I would say look it up and understand the genetics and the disorders that can run in families and can cause issues. The founder effect changed how my group did things. Because of the founder effect, detailed family histories have to be kept.
Mm-hmm.
And those detailed family histories are used by the elders in the family to decide what matches to make, because you're trying not to have those genetics overlap, even though the overlap is nearly impossible to avoid.
Oh,
So
right.
that's why.
You don't want to make sick babies, right?
Exactly. So that's why the matches are made younger by the family members instead of waiting till the kids are older to choose, because you kind of have to figure out the genetics of it all if you're in such a small group.
Right. So how young are the kids when the decision's made? Is the decision made for them, or how does that work?
Depends on the group, but some groups,
group.
the decisions are made at birth. Some groups make the decisions at 3-4 years of age. The decisions are really made by the families,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids really aren't aware of what it all means.
Okay.
Basically, at a very young age, you begin to be told, you're going to go over to so-and-so's farm and help them.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means as a girl is you're going to go learn how to do things at that farm because that's his family and you're learning from his mother.
Mm-hmm.
So you're learning how to cook from his mother. You're learning how to clean and keep house from his mother. Because in a patriarchal structure, maintaining the things the way that they should be maintained for the man means keeping his life consistent the way that he likes it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're learning those things to maintain his home the way it's always been maintained for centuries, so that there's no disruption in his life.
Right. It sounds like it's an arranged marriage.
Very much so.
Can either of the kids break off the arranged marriage?
Yes.
Okay.
It's arranged in the sense that genetically it's the best thing, and the families get together the best, and the families feel compatible to have it work. But the kids are not going through a courtship process at this point.
Okay.
The kids wait and go through courtship processes when they're adults.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, you find out whether you're meant to be together or not. And at any point, if it's figured out that you're not, then things immediately stop.
Oh, okay. So it's not arranged marriage as much as it's not arranged in the sense that it's locked in. It's more like they're pointing you in a certain direction, but things
Exactly.
can go wrong later. What kind of things would during the courtship process would break off the arrangement?
Well, cheating.
Well, obviously.
Cheating is definitely a big one. That would definitely be one of the major deciding factors. If in the process at the exact point in time in the process where you figure out that you can't be with that person for all eternity, that is the point in the process where it ends.
Does that happen a lot or rarely?
It hardly ever happens, because if you are raised with somebody and you are raised within their family in a certain way, you're not living with their family, but you're raised within their family, it's very unlikely that you're not going to be able to get along with them.
Right.
If you've been raised with them. More often than not, if there's a problem, it's usually the guy will usually break it off.
Oh.
He doesn't usually have such a big commitment. He's not going to her family and learning how to do things.
Right.
So there's less of a tie on his part to her family. So that would be where it would come from.
Usually,
but there are consequences for all decisions that you make.
Right.
So it can add difficulty if a match doesn't work.
What kind of difficulty?
Well, if a match doesn't work, then finding another match within the community probably isn't going to happen.
Oh.
So then you're left in a situation where you're finding a match from outside of the community, which can be a difficult undertaking, especially with a faith that people view in a negative way sometimes.
Right. Yeah, you told me previously about how in the area where you are, some people, if they recognize that you're a Quaker, they end up not liking you.
Yes. We are, if you've ever heard the term Hicks in the Sticks.
Yeah.
I'm Hicksite Quaker. We are the Hicks in the Sticks that people make fun of.
Oh.
That's what they
That's where
would
that
yell
came
at
from.
me when they would beat me with twigs and branches. Yes.
I didn't know that. Okay. I didn't know where that kind of thing came from. So even though the children are set up on a path to marriage early and they have the courtship process, are they the ones with the final decision for whether or not it happens?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But like you said,
Yes.
there's consequences for making the decision to not do it. Like you can't then marry inside the community.
Right.
Right. Are you ostracized? Can you still see your family?
You're not ostracized.
Okay.
You can definitely still see your family. Your family still loves you. There's no shunning.
Okay.
if that's the word you're looking for.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
There's no shunning. Everybody can always go home at the end of the day and be loved and appreciated and all of that. But within a structure like mine, the surname has a reputation. And every party within the structure has the responsibility of upholding that surname in a positive way.
Right.
So if something bad happens in some way, it's going to affect that surname.
Right.
So there is a little bit of a, that happened. The family will absorb that, but it's not something that they're going to be like, no, you can't come home.
Okay. Okay, so when you're making decisions, you're not just making a decision as an individual, you're thinking about your decisions in the context of your larger family reputation. Exactly,
but we're raised that way from day one.
Right. And since you live in communities, I guess, in regular America, we move around so much, it's not uncommon to not know your neighbors, but since you're raised in these communities, your family, the neighboring families are probably known each other for a very long time. Is that right?
Everybody knows everybody, and in some way, shape, or form, pretty much everybody is related to everybody in one way, shape, or form.
Oh.
My husband jokes with me because he's not from the community. He joked with me that my family tree is more like a wreath.
Oh.
It just goes in a circle. And it, whether you married into that family or not, one of your cousins or somebody else probably married into that family. And so in one way or another, you're all family at some point. And the communities are small enough, pretty much everybody. And if you don't know the individual, definitely the surname and the reputation of the surname to know how to respond to the person when you're around them.
Okay. Okay. And how about, so once the marriage happens, or you have the initial pairing, then you have the courtship process. What I think you talked a little bit about it, but what kind of things happen during the courtship process?
Well, first and foremost, you know, the father has to approve.
Mm-hmm.
The family has to approve.
Right.
They have to really, really, really like and agree to the individual. Formal introductions are made, but the process is extremely, extremely slow. And in fact, if you're looking to hold hands with a girl before the 6-month mark on the relationship, you're moving too fast.
Oh, that is pretty slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the majority of the first months of the courtship is silence. You don't talk to one another.
Really?
Yes.
How does
Yes.
that work? Do you just sit in the same room with them, or?
Yes. You sit far apart
Uh-huh.
in the same room. Over time, you're permitted to sit closer.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, you're permitted to look at one another briefly, glimpses.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, he'll be allowed to lead you on a walk.
Is there an
without saying a
escort
word.
during the walk?
There usually are chaperones.
Yeah.
And as technology's improved, we have different ways to chaperone. Technology's great, so we use that a lot of times in our chaperoning now.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times the elderly aunts, uncles, grandmas who don't have jobs
Mm-hmm.
are the actual chaperones.
Okay.
Parents who have jobs. Right now I do a lot of the cyber chaperoning.
Okay.
Because it's one of those things that I can still be here and still do my work and then just, deal with it individually as it comes up. But back in the day when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of these resources. So yes, it was a physical person.
So what happens with cyber chaperoning? Do you track them with GPS or something?
There are apps for religious families that have that need chaperones.
Really? I didn't know that. I'll have to look that up.
Yes, there are, and some of them don't say specific things about religions. Some of the religions have worked up specific deals with those companies. So yes.
Huh. So, well, give me an idea of what happens when you do cyber chaperoning. What do you do when you do that?
Well, it's problematic for a girl to be alone with a boy in any form. So, for example, if my daughter has to go out and she has to do shopping, and she looks inside the store and it's just the one employee and he's a man, she'll call me and she'll say, I'm doing shopping, I have to go into the store and buy something, there's only one employee, he's a man. So I say, okay. So I stay on the phone, I listen, I make sure the conversation's good, that everything's fine, and then once she leaves, she goes, okay, I'm done with that part of my shopping.
Huh.
So that type of thing.
Okay.
It can be done for dates. It can be done for things as simple as that. It can be done for a variety of reasons.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't even know those kinds of apps existed. Huh.
Surprise.
Yeah, that is quite a surprise to me, but I guess it makes sense if there's demand for it. Someone's gonna make it. Was it Quaker software engineers that originally made them, or was it just people around the world made them?
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if a religious group was responsible.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people do use it for children,
Mm-hmm.
even if they aren't religious. But yeah, those things exist.
So once the couple gets married, once the couple gets married, how does that structure work? Does the father have the final say on things? Does the mother have some authority, or the wife, I should say? What kind of?
Well,
Okay.
our structure isn't one of power.
Okay.
It's one of respect. So all throughout my life being raised, I was taught about respect and love and balance. And these were things that were taught by everyone in my family, but the men in the family would take special time to be with their daughters to teach them certain lessons. I learned how to ballroom dance. Part of learning how to ballroom dance is learning that two people can't lead at the same time and have the dance look meaningful and beautiful. That someone has to agree to lead and somebody has to agree to follow, and that there are responsibilities to each and a balance to each, but each are equally important and each are equally beautiful. So it's lessons like this that come in loving ways. Also, our lessons in silence. I was given a journal when I turned 10 years old, and I was told every single word that you say has an influence. It's either a positive influence, a negative influence, or it's neutral. But very few things are neutral. It'll either have a weight towards the positive or the negative. And that way that you speak will either add to the way people see you and this family and the way you are in the world, or it will detract. So for 1 month, I had to write down every word that I said, and whether it had a positive effect, a negative effect, or no effect. And then at the end of the month, I had to sit down and go through the book with my family. And if you're speaking and the majority of what you say has no effect, well, that means you're wasting your words. And if you're wasting your words, then people won't listen to you because you're not saying anything meaningful. If your words mostly have a positive influence, then of course, that's a very good thing for you, your family, for representing God. If your words have a negative effect, then there's a lot of character work and building that goes into that. But just learning the balance of words and what those words mean help you to learn the balance of respect. We're also put in situations growing up where we're required to trust. So if my father or my grandfather had a dangerous job that only a littler person could do, they would explain to you, this is a dangerous situation and here's why. Here are the things that could happen. But here are the things that I'm going to do to protect you because I would never let anything bad happen to you. So you go into these situations being taught trust, love, respect, balance. And all of these things come into play then when you get married, because the man's power really comes from respecting him, trusting him, loving him, and having those feelings. If a man has to exert power to get his way, that's not going to sustain things in a healthy way. That's going to become oppressive. If
Right.
a man doesn't assert who he is, then things will just fall apart and disintegrate because there will be no leader. The dance will look messy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want the dance to look like a struggle for power. You don't want the dance to look like it's falling apart without a plan. The dance has to be balanced.
It sounds like a lot of, for lack of a better word, social skills are explicitly taught within the Quaker community. Because a lot of the things that you're telling me, I was never formally taught those things. I mean, obviously, there's a difference in culture between Quaker community and the outside world, but whatever equivalent in the outside world there would be for that, I was never formally taught any of those kinds of things. Just off the top of my head, I don't know any family that did that kind of thing where they would, very explicitly teach these kinds of social skills or knowledge, or I'm not sure what else to call it besides that. Or even like with the tracking your words, are most of your words have no impact? Do they have a positive impact? That type of thing. There was never anything like that in my upbringing at all. Not even remotely close to it.
Really?
And no, there wasn't. And that's it. It's interesting to me because that gives you an idea of the kind of impact you're having on other people. And I would assume if you're mostly having a positive impact on others, other people will like you more. They'll want to interact with you more. They'll want to help you if you need help. So you would have it'd be a way to grease the social wheels, I guess. It would be a way to make things more go more smoothly. And that type of thing. Yeah, there was never any type of like formal tracking like that. It was more of learn as you go
Hmm,
kind of thing for me when I was, and I think that was true for probably for most people and probably most of the listeners, probably most Americans, honestly. Um,
really?
that would be my best guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I don't know if I could find data to prove that, but yeah, a lot of social skills I either had to learn on my own or watch other people, or as I got older and the internet became available, go read about it or watch, or more recently you can watch videos about social charisma and that kind of thing. So a lot of that's so you probably have like I don't want to call them protocols or whatever, but like whenever you encounter a social situation, you probably already know how to deal with it because you've been taught how. Does that seem right?
A lot of it is that way, yes. When from the very earliest when I was a child, I remember whenever I'd hear something that would make me mad or I was starting to get a little flustered, my parents would give me they gave me a roll of lifesaver candies. And they said, anytime you get to where you want to open your mouth to say something mean, to say something that isn't the kindest, stop and take a minute and put a lifesaver in your mouth. And don't bite it, don't chew it, just suck on the lifesaver and think about it. And we were taught that your lifesaver is Jesus. So you're thinking about, you have the connection with Jesus and the lifesaver, and you're thinking about it, and you're a child. And in the time it takes to do that, you've calmed yourself and you're thinking about what you're going to say, and then you're preparing yourself. And so those lessons as a very young child, and even young children go to silent worship. So you're sitting quietly, still, patiently, and it starts out small times for a child and gets longer times as you get older. So just understanding silence is a huge part. And we say, if you don't understand our silence, then you'll never understand our words. And that's a lot of it too, is we act with intention because we've learned to
Because you
take the time to
to
have
pause and think
intention.
about it, right? That makes
Yes.
sense. So when you're married, do you track something like that too? Like, am I having a positive influence on my husband? Am I having a positive influence on my wife? Is
Yes.
there something like that? Okay.
Yes. Every day and every word that you say is an opportunity of, am I making things with my spouse better or worse? Am I making things with my children better or worse? Every time I open my mouth, am I making the world better or worse?
And since you've been raised that way to keep track of that kind of thing, it probably comes natural after years and years of doing it.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. And I think I've been in your comment section about 7 months now.
I'm sorry. I've seen my comment section sometimes.
I think you can tell that there's a restraint there sometimes.
Yeah.
that I try to be very focused with my intention.
Right. Yeah, you've been a very good contributor to my comment section. Thank you. That's part of why I want to do this with you. So once the couple is married, is they've already been taught. It's not just that they get married; they've already been taught all of these skills leading up to it. Whether it's a general social skill, like are your words having a positive influence on others? Um, but are there other things explicitly taught to prepare them for marriage, or once they're married, the kinds of things that's going to be expected of them?
Well, I think some of the important things are that, your bedroom should be empty of absolutely anything that's not about the purpose of building a connection with your significant other. So if there's anything in your bedroom that distracts from that purpose, it's gone.
So you wouldn't have a television
Um,
in the bedroom.
no, there's no television in the bedroom, no computer in the bedroom. The bedroom is about one thing and one thing only. It's about a connection with your spouse. And nobody's allowed in that bedroom except for you and your spouse. Your children do not come into that bedroom. Your parents do not come into that bedroom. Nobody comes into that bedroom other than you and your spouse.
Hmm. That's interesting. Do you keep? This might sound weird, but do you keep alarm clocks in there too, or no?
Yes, we have alarm clocks,
Okay.
but we are notorious for getting up early on our own anyway
Okay.
and going to bed early. A lot of acreages, farms, even though there's others. We specifically have jobs that, well, my husband has a job that's outside the home, very technical job, but due to the farming nature that's around us, people are used to very early schedule.
Oh, okay. So they don't really need the alarm clocks anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Huh. So during the course of the marriage, then the children are raised the same way. But what happens? Is there such a thing as Quaker divorce?
There have been a few divorces. Most of the divorces that have occurred have been from Quaker men marrying non-Quaker women. Most of the women who have married non-Quaker men all stay married, but for some reason, the other way around, it doesn't seem to work. But there pretty much isn't divorces. Because of the family name and the family structure, it would be a stigma to the family name.
Right.
So when a woman gets married, I got to try to think of how to word this because every time I try to type this in the comment section, it gets deleted, so I know it's being censored. Let me think about it here a second. Okay. So when people buy a home or a car, you are signing legal paperwork basically saying that you intend of taking responsibility and ownership of that item and its care. A woman gives up her last name, and on the documents, she takes a new last name, which is a sign that she is belonging to a new group that will care for her and be responsible for her. So she is now with that family. And to get a divorce, if she had children, that surname is the most important thing. So raising that child to carry on that surname and that name in honor is the primary objective of that family. If she decides she wants to leave, she can leave. But those children still need to be raised in the name of that surname. So they will most likely stay with the father's family and then be raised by either the help of his mother or a sister, someone like that to come in to help to raise those children to the standard of that surname. Now, she could go back home if she wants, but if she goes back home, then they are reclaiming her. See, they've already let her go. Again, I'm trying to choose my wording carefully.
Okay.
So if they reclaim her, which they would do because she would not be shunned or outcast, but to reclaim her would be to have the stain of that situation then absorbed to that line to her brothers and anyone else down the line who would be matched.
Right.
So more than likely, because she was raised with honor, respect, and all of these other qualities, she would not bring that stain back to her family. She would probably go on her own and do her own things and take care of herself.
Oh. Oh, and just to clear something up from a comment you made earlier, at least on my channel, you're one of my approved commenters. So even if I set a video where all comments are held for review, you get right through that.
I have noticed that, yes.
So yeah, so I haven't been deleting any of your comments on my channel. I'm not
I didn't
sure.
think you were.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Just to let everyone know, I'm not. I try to stay light on the censorship, but some certain. I've noticed that certain topics or certain guests seem to trigger my comment section. So when I hold the comments for review, I just I let through comments that disagree, but as long as they're not rude. Comments that are outright rude is the ones that I end up either deleting or banning the user. But yeah, you personally are not being deleted or censored on my comment section.
I imagine YouTube has an issue with some of my ideas, probably. But.
Yeah, I have noticed that this is a little bit off topic, but I've noticed there was a few times people wanted to email me. And oddly enough, YouTube will not allow me to put my own email address in my own comment section. Like that will be automatically deleted. So even though I'm the owner of the channel, I can't put my own email address in my own comment section. I can put it in the description box of the video, but not in the comment section. I don't know why. And that's something that YouTube does on its own. There's no setting that I found where I could allow that to go through. And I would have thought that since I'm the owner of the channel, that you would be allowed to do that, but apparently not. So even the owners of channels have some restrictions on what we can post to our own channels, and I don't know why it's like that, but that's just how YouTube does it. Speaking of which, would Quakers run their own YouTube channels? Because I actually tried looking it up, and I found a few. But is that normal?
Yes, Quakers could do that. My particular kind, no. There are vanity standards among a lot of different Quakers, and many Quakers, when they're buried with no tombstone, with no grave marker. Ironically enough, all of this is about the surname and the propagation of the surname and how important that is.
Mm-hmm.
But the individual name of the person, it's not so much about you have to think about the vanity of a name and all that type of thing. So we do things to serve God, not ourselves. So we serve God through our families. But every person has their own standards for vanity. So yes, you could see that. And there are many Quakers now being buried under grave markers with their names on them too. So it's, like I said, there are as many types of Quakers as there are groups and people, and they all do things a little bit differently. But yes, they could have a YouTube channel.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was curious about that.
So I haven't seen many, so I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen many either. So if a woman gets divorced, there's a good chance she just goes off on her own rather than going back to her own family. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Now there would be exceptions.
Okay.
If a woman is being abused, that's never tolerated. That is never tolerated. But physical violence of any type, physical assertion of authority of any type, those things are seen as aggressions, and aggressions are just simply not tolerated. Those things, there would be massive interventions, there would be all sorts of protocols. Luckily, we don't have those instances. I have not seen those instances. But those things would just not be tolerated at all.
Well, you Quakers are actually pacifists. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So you don't use violence even in self-defense.
Exactly.
Right. So, and that's
we
not
would
just
die for a cause, but we would never kill for one.
right. So it's not just in the situation of marriage; it's in all situations that you refuse to use violence.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's from
yes, and
go ahead.
It's from a long-standing tradition, but I'm going to talk politics. I shouldn't.
That's fine. You don't have
William Penn, when he first came over, he created basically his Charter of Privileges, which gave all Quakers and Pennsylvania citizens certain basic rights.
Mm-hmm.
And this was done in 1701. And among a lot of the basic rights were mentions of the First Amendment. Actually, William Penn's Charter of Privileges was basically the prototype for our Bill of Rights and for our Constitution. So, and his foundation of democracy is basically due to William Penn. But
right.
But you know that probably.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of that. Growing up near DC, you get a lot of that early colonial history.
Yeah, but because of the persecution that we endured, and being burned at the stake in England and hung in Boston, and a lot of the different difficulties that we faced, we definitely do not use violence. We value all people, and we help those to free themselves from oppression.
Right. In previous conversations you and I had, there's a phrase that or even maybe you didn't use these exact words, but you said something like, men keep the structure and teach the structure. What exactly does that mean?
Well, the structure is handed down through the surname. So in that way, the structure is kept with the man, and you go with the man and keep his structure. But it's taught by the men. I have had the privilege of knowing so many amazing and wonderful men. Just learning how to ballroom dance, learning to think about my voice or silence, having my father say, okay, here's the deal, we're going to have a fishing competition, and it's just, fathers and daughters, and here's the type of fish that we're going to fish for, and they're a bottom feeder. Now, here's what they typically like. Now, it's your job to create a bait recipe, and you need to make the best one so that, we can win this contest. So you're learning how to cooperate with your dad. You're learning to listen to your dad and his experience, to take what he says into stock. But then he's letting you use where you shine in the kitchen with the things that you've learned from your mother, to make a bait recipe, to pack a lunch, to go fishing, to have this contest. It all ties together in a way to where you just learn respect and love and an understanding of balance and how to work together.
So when you talk about the structure, you mean the formal and informal rules and maybe the personal preferences of the family. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. They teach the structure through dance and the lessons. They teach the balance. They teach the trust. They teach the responsibility, the love, and of course, everybody in the family is doing this. But it's the man's primary job to be the leader in bringing these lessons about. And my disagreement with Annika the other night in the live, well, not the live stream, it was recorded, but towards the end, she said, women need to teach women and men need to teach men. Well, yes, in some ways. There are skills that my mother has that she hands down to me. There's skills that my father has that he hands down, to my brother and all that. But men also have to hand down information to their daughters about how men treat women and how men value women and how to respect one another and trust one another. My mother can tell me all day long, hey, trust your father, trust men, but that doesn't work unless you specifically learn it from that group of people.
Right. Yeah, I talked about her with that after the video, and she said she mainly was focusing on things like teaching women about things like breastfeeding or their monthly cycle, that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, but you're talking about things that I think I understand what you're getting at about when you said teaching the daughter about how men respect women, because there's things that, especially when they're young, that, because I've seen this happen with lady friends of mine where she couldn't tell if a boy liked her, or do you mean like, and I'm asking you this as a question, do you mean things like this is how a man should treat you? When a man treats you with respect, this is what it should look like, or when men do this, what they mean is this other thing, or these, or here, daughter, here's the types of things you should expect out of a man when you're married to him. Are those the types of things you mean by the kind of stuff that a father could teach a daughter about men?
It's a lot of learning by example and learning by watching. It's a lot of learning through the things that you do with your father, but it's also things that are stated like that. Yeah, so a father could very clearly tell you, hey, I see this in this person. When this person does this, I question it in this way.
Okay.
And because you're raised to trust and respect your father, you're going to trust and respect his opinion.
Okay. I think I see what you're getting at. So, a specific example might be, okay, you're dating this boy, and he says he works this minimum wage job, but he's wearing a $10,000 watch. That seems kind of strange. Where did he get that watch from? Um,
Exactly.
right. It's like a suspicious thing that that especially an older person might notice that a younger person wouldn't.
Hmm.
Do mothers do something similar with their sons?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in fact, when you talked about your father cooking and these different things, and you thought maybe I would think that was strange, we don't think that's strange because we teach both our boys and girls to be competent in the world, to learn how to do things. So I would, of course, teach my son how to cook. Our daughter, of course, since I'm from a family of gearheads, she learns things, within the automotive industry. So there are different skills that are taught that it doesn't really matter what the gender is. There needs to be a thirst for education and a value for education. And there needs to be a level of competency so that you can function on your own. And in these tasks where I'm working with my son or my husband's working with our daughter or whatever we're doing, these lessons just kind of come about naturally without thought because that's how I was raised. Now, with my husband, it's taken a lot of explaining and a lot of watching and a lot of learning and a lot of figuring things out to catch on, to understand how to do it because it's not as natural for him. He wasn't raised in that way.
Right. So you said
But yeah,
you're a gearhead family.
we all know something about cars.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes. We're from a long line of gearheads, yes.
Huh. It's surprising that, to me, at least as an outsider, it's kind of surprising that that's part of it. But from everything else you've said, it makes sense. So,
But
are you an engineer?
no, I am not an engineer.
Oh, okay. But do you work on cars yourself?
I because we are versed in listening,
Mm-hmm.
I understand a great deal about cars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you ask me what a carburetor does, I could tell you exactly what it does.
Okay.
If you ask me, what does it mean if the mixture is running lean? Okay, if it's running lean, it's getting too much oxygen. You're going to hear a wheezing in the intake. If
Hmm.
it's running rich, then what's going to happen is you're going to probably see black smoke come out of the exhaust. If you've
Right.
flooded it, well, you probably have debris in the pan or the float is jammed and then the gasoline's overflowing and getting the spark plug wet. So, I mean, I know it, but I haven't worked on it.
Oh, okay.
But that's because we're raised to listen.
Right. Huh. That's kind of different from what I expected. Because at least in the outside world, patriarchy is or patriarchal structures are always, demonized, and um, it's always viewed in like an oppressive light, and the idea that the women in the family would end up learning how automobiles work and how to fix them or how to build them or how to design them would seem out of place with at least how the outside world views patriarchal structures. But that seems to be an incorrect view, at least for your Quaker community.
It's it's difficult because I live around a lot of different structures. And I see some structures where women are not encouraged to learn and where even men are not encouraged to learn. I think there's difficulties with that sometimes. But I also live near people who value education as well. The problem that we're finding is education and religion are a strange mix to find, apparently. People who tend to be extremely educated tend to not want to associate with us because of the religion, but then those that are very religious tend not to want to associate with us because of our education. So that's our struggle that we're running into right now.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem because you're right. Typically, people who are more educated or are not very religious, and I assume vice versa. Is that part of the problem with dealing with the outside world or finding partners in the outside world?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. We're finding that we're a quirky mix of things, and people don't quite get the mix. a lot of times.
Yeah, I can understand how it. Some of the things you said surprised me, but um, I mean, once you
What
explain it, it makes
surprises you?
sense. Like the automotive stuff, I wouldn't have expected that, but that would definitely be one. And also, even though it's under you call it a patriarchal structure, it sounds like the women have a lot more freedom of choice than I would have expected, since they can break off pairings during the courtship process. Um,
We have free will.
right.
We have free will. We have free choices. To come to our faith, you have to come to it as an adult. You have to be fully aware of what you're doing and understand.
So unlike Catholics who
It's
get
important.
baptized and confirmed as Catholics, you have to be an adult before you can actually be an actual Quaker.
Yes.
So
We're all about our intentions. So it's very important to us that people are informed and understand and know their own intentions and know their own mind.
So did your husband convert to being a Quaker?
No,
Oh,
my husband is not,
okay.
and he never will be.
But you still were able to marry him.
Yes, it took a longer time
Mm-hmm.
because my parents disapproved,
Oh,
and it was a very difficult process. But in the end, it all worked out.
well,
He
that's
was
good.
very persistent.
So he eventually won over your family. Well, I guess he had to,
Eventually.
right? Eventually, he must have won you over before that. But yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. Was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I just I get curious sometimes about what people think, because when I read a lot of the comments sometimes, I get the feeling that people think patriarchal structures, that all of them are solely about power
Right.
and exerting power.
And that's typically the
And
way it's presented to us, probably because of feminism.
really,
Yes.
is that what you thought of structures when they were mentioned?
Honestly, I didn't think too much about it growing up. And then as I got older and, I grew up in a blue state, so, patriarchy was always said in a bad way. But if you think about what the word means, patriarch, as far as I'm aware, the literal meaning of the word is the rule of the father. And it is kind of curious that feminists named the greatest evil in feminism, they named it after men. So for, if you're going to say you're a feminist but you really like men, it's kind of I think it's kind of a hard case to make. But at least in the America I'm used to, patriarchy or, a male authority was maybe not always presented in a bad light, but often enough. And the kind of things that you're telling me about, it reminds me of how I was, the impression that I got of how America used to be, like especially how important the family name was. I remember reading somewhere that back in the olden days, this would have been probably before my parents' time. Yeah, it would have been before my parents' time. That if you had even like a suicide or a mental illness somewhere in the family, like even just an uncle or someone, not necessarily a mother or father, like that would tarnish the family name and might make the kids have a harder time finding a marriage partner, that type of thing. But I'm not exactly sure when that went away or when that faded out, because now usually the boyfriend, girlfriend, or, fiance, they meet the family, they meet the other side's family, but the family doesn't seem to have as much input as a Quaker family might to who their sons and daughters partner up with. I mean, I'm sure, I would hope most families, like if they thought their child was about to make a really big mistake, the mother or father would step in and say, hey, I think you're about to make a really big mistake. I think most families would still do that, but it's not as formal of a process. And certainly since we don't live in those small communities anymore, we don't know the reputation of the family that the other person comes from. I mean, maybe it's different among celebrities because they probably all know one another. But most Americans, it's more anonymous. Like I said, a lot of us don't even know who our neighbors are. And most of the people on my street I don't even recognize, to be quite honest with you.
Wow.
I've moved around. Let's see, the first time it was the end of second grade, the first time we moved. Then we moved again at the end of fifth grade. And then as an adult, I moved around a couple times. So I don't really feel like I'm from anywhere. Like there's a lot of people that'll have school pride or, pride in their college, and they'll like I went to the University of Maryland, and there's the Terps is the college team that for that school, but I don't really feel any kind of bond to any, whether it was high school or college I went to. To me, the because we moved around, the schools I went to, basically the building's a giant box, and there's smaller boxes inside called classrooms, and I was just with some random kids. But I don't know if that's I don't think most Americans have quite that experience because they don't move around. They don't move around quite as much. Most of the kids I knew growing up, they stayed in the same area. Like they went to elementary school with the same kids. They went to middle school with the same kids. They went to high school with the same kids. But for me, middle and high school was similar. Was a lot of the same kids. But elementary and then middle school was different kids, and then college was almost all completely different people. So that's probably part of why I don't really feel. I mean, I feel like I'm from America, but anything more specific than that, I don't really feel like I'm from a certain place. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, and in my family, we do have a family book where I can trace back some of my ancestors, but the family lineage is not as important as the impression you've given me with Quakers. And the only reason we even have that family book is because distant relatives compiled it, and my great grandfather, I think it's either great grandfather or great great grandfather, shows up in it. If not for that, and that family book actually doesn't even have my surname. So if if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't know anything about. And it was, in that book, it was one of the women from the other family got married to, I believe it was my great grandfather. Now, on my mother's side, she's been tracing the family lineage, but there's no organized book for that type of thing. My mother was able to use like Ancestry.com to trace back like the boat that my great grandparents came over to America on. So one side, my mother's side, they're more recent migrants. Now the other side of the family, they go back to before America was America. They actually fought in the Revolutionary. So I have distant relatives that fought in like the Revolutionary War, but I didn't even know about that until I was somewhere in my 20s or 30s. I didn't read the book till I was in my 30s, but I knew the book existed when I was in my 20s, but it was never really it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a central part to our life, the way that it sounds like Quaker families are to Quakers. So
you didn't grow up on a piece of land for hundreds of years?
No, definitely not. No, definitely
in your
not.
home, when you touched the furniture and things, were you touching furniture that was 100, 200 years old?
Definitely not. No.
Were you seeing pictures of your ancestors on the walls?
No. No. The closest I get to that is, my parents and grandparents would buy furniture that would last a long time. I think we have some furniture that might be between 50 and 75 years old, but that's about it. And as far as like handing down family heirlooms, there's some that might go, I want to say 3 or 4 generations back at the most, but that's about it.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's not that that family connection to the past like you guys have. And like I said, like with the family book, I read that on my own. I didn't read the whole thing, but I was just reading along the family line that I was connected to. And if it wasn't for a distant relative who compiled it, I wouldn't know any of that kind of thing. And like the stuff that my mother's been able to pick up from her side, no one wrote it down. It's just research she's doing on the internet through places like Ancestry.com. So she'll know names.
None of that stuff was in her hope chest or anything?
No, nothing like that at all. No, she had to go out and find that information all on her own. And she'll know names of people. She might find some photos of them now and then. She might find out like where they got married, who they got married to, maybe where they lived, and their profession. But what happened during their lifetime? What kind of life did they really have? We don't really know. There's no information on that kind of thing. Like no one kept diaries. or if they did, those diaries are long gone.
We never used to keep written histories when the persecution occurred because whole families could be jailed, killed. But once families could write down everything, everything was written. So I have these big, thick books on almost every line of my family. Well, I shared one of them with you, so you
Yeah, thank
probably
you for
have
that.
seen that's a thick
Yeah.
book.
Yes.
But yeah, that's very strange because where almost every item I touch or look at or see belonged in some way somewhere to a relative of my husband or mine, or I was lucky that my hope chest had so many things from my grandmother's great grandmother's great 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 grandmother's diaries, photos, histories. So the things I cook, I know my family ate hundreds of years ago. um it's almost shocking to hear that you didn't have pictures up or
No, nothing
things
like
to
that.
touch.
I mean, I might have like photos of grandparents, but great grandparents, no, nothing like that, and definitely not further back.
No quilts,
Than that.
no Quaker lace, no.
Um, Quilts. Maybe. I think there are some that might go back as far as a great grandparent, but that would be about it. Um, I mean, there probably are some other items I'm not really thinking of. My mother would probably know the answer to that, but like all the furniture in my house, either I bought it myself or it was given to me as a gift. So they're all of much more recent construction than, they're definitely not centuries old or anything like that. Um, hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very disconnection from it's very much a disconnection from the past. There's no real connection to a larger lineage. And I think that's pretty common in America. That's the impression I get. Like you might know a little bit about your ancestors, but not really any kind of detail.
The thing that I'm noticing that is the frustrating part
Hmm.
in finding matches for the kids is there seems to just be a general lack of intention.
Oh, like they just want to date for fun, or they just don't know what they want with a partner, or
Just a lack of intention about the overview of their life, what
oh,
they want, a focus to get there. It's just, yeah, it's a different mindset.
yeah. I wonder if part of it is because you're severed from the past. There's no family name to hold up. So, like, just having a family name to hold up provides you at least with some structure. So
Yeah.
right, and can give you an idea of some direction, but that when you don't have that, there's that structure is removed from you. Um,
Well, I can imagine if you're moving, you can't just walk into a new store you've never been to and say, put that on my tab, and they'll be like, yeah, sure.
yeah,
Because I guess you're right, your name wouldn't have the same meaning as
no,
if you're with people that know you.
no, yeah, it really wouldn't, and yeah, I can see how having that longer lineage provides you at least with some. Maybe it doesn't tell you which way to go, but at least what not to tear down. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, but for me, like I said, it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I even knew this family book existed, and the family book doesn't even have my surname. It's only because one of the women in that other family um, married into mine, and honestly, I don't even know very much about my father's father. I don't even know much about his life history, except for what I knew of him personally. So I would have been pretty young when I met him. I've been I've been an infant when I first met him, but like his personal life history, I don't know a whole lot about, and I definitely don't know anything about his father or his mother. I mean, I've heard their names a couple times, but I couldn't tell you what their names were. Um,
So did you get to know your grandparents really well, or were they older when
they were
you were
older.
born?
Yeah, they were older when I was born, but I always got to see them. My mother's family lived physically closer to us, so I got to visit them a lot more often. My father's family was distant, so I saw them a couple times a year. But I got to know them probably not as well as you would know your grandparents, but I did get to know them, before they passed away.
Hmm. And were any of your great grandparents alive when you were born?
No.
Okay.
No, they weren't alive at all.
We typically marry young, so it's like babies having babies having babies.
Right.
Typically, we're in college when we get married. We all get through college, but typically we're also working jobs and having babies.
Hmm.
And I had the pleasure of getting to know great-grandparents and extended aunts and uncles and grandparents and
No, wait.
all of that.
There was one great-grandparent I knew as a kid, now that I think about it. I only vaguely remember her. I remember her sitting in a chair. I think maybe one great-grandfather too. Yeah, I think, now that I'm thinking about it, I remember him working in a garden, because he liked to garden. There was a chair she sat in, and there was a bell that I would ring. She actually gave me that bell after she passed away. But that's about it. I don't really remember. I couldn't even. Well, I know the name of one of them. I know the name of one of my great grandfathers because I have his same first name. But that's, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, but see, I had to even talk it out to even remember this stuff. So that's that's how much we don't. I like I said, I think I'm pretty common for Americans not knowing this kind of information. I'm sure people in the comment section will talk about that. I bet there's other.
I'm not sure what they're going to say. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I bet there's a lot of other little differences too. That, well, since you married an outsider, you probably noticed a lot of little differences between the two worlds.
It's taken my husband a lot of time to kind of understand the differences. And there will be times where he will just look at me and shake his head, and he's like, I know, but it's quirky. You know, so we have those moments, and it's been a lot. I mean, the structures that we have are a lot of responsibility, and they are a lot of work. And I think that's the misconception that some men have in the comment section is they think that it's not responsibility and work, that you're just going to say this structure exists and it exists and you're the ruler and, you know, you're king. But it's not like that. It is work. It's responsibility. It's building trust and loyalty and love. And, you know, it's something that takes time to learn how to do. And my husband's family still doesn't understand some of it. They still don't appreciate some of it. I got a lot of criticism early on in the marriage for, you know, they wanted things done their way, but the agreement my husband and I had was between us.
Right.
And, you know, they weren't of the same patriarchal structure.
Right.
So his sister, well, she's more vocal and more out there. And, you know, there was criticism about some of our ways, some of our ideas. So it's taken time, but, you know, we've definitely won everybody over, and it's all good. But yeah, there are huge differences in the way my husband's family did things and the way my family did things.
Right. Well, since Quakers get married young, who takes care of childcare? Does the mother stay at home, or does she keep working?
Well, that depends. A lot of times, everybody tries to stay home until the kids go to school. And then once the child goes to school, then usually you try to work only those hours that the child is at school.
Okay.
And we've been very lucky that there are a lot of businesses who are very aware of us, and we now have a lot of people higher up in those companies that allow these things to happen.
Oh, okay. So they're accommodating for your lifestyle.
Yes. But there are times when the community will share the responsibility, or aunts and uncles will share the responsibility, because the community, people live close. There's always somebody there. It's not like we don't know our neighbors or we're in that situation. Right. So there's an advantage to knowing everybody.
So you don't have to put the kids in daycare.
Exactly. But with every system, there's disadvantages.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and say this is a perfect system and everybody should do this. No, I mean, in a smaller community, like I said, there's health and genetic issues to consider.
Right.
And in a smaller community where your reputation is everything, if you're that little baby born to a family that has a bad reputation, you're going to have an uphill battle, and it's not going to be your fault.
Right. So if you're one of those babies born into a family with a bad reputation, is there a way to work your way out of that?
It is a very slow, difficult process because it's assumed that if you're from a disreputable family, that those disreputable ways are going to be passed on.
Mm-hmm.
So it really takes having a mentor from one of those more reputable families,
Mm-hmm.
working a job for one of those more reputable families, proving yourself, and even with that, you're really going to take 2 or 3 generations to change that family name.
So
I don't.
Go ahead.
I don't want everybody to think like, "Wow, these structures are simple."
Right.
There's complexities, there's downsides, but that's true of every structure.
Right. It also seems like you're thinking more long, and when I say long term, I mean across generations. So if you're a baby born to one of the disreputable families and you want to undo the family's bad name, your planning would have to be, okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna do better, and my son's gonna do better, and my son's gonna do better, so we can dig our way out of this.
Exactly.
Oh wow.
And it's not an easy process.
No, I can't imagine it would be.
In a small group of people that have their minds set about something, it's not an easy process.
Right. Yeah, so you'd have to really be a good, you'd have to set a good example across generations, but I assume if one of those generations fails, your name still stays tarnished.
Yeah. Yeah, you would have to be of extraordinary character, and you would have to prove that and be above reproach. And you'd have to pass that on, and it would be an uphill climb. So to anybody out there who thinks it's an easy thing, or you can take it by power, or you can just, no, there's a lot of aspects to it. There's a lot of things that go into it, and it's filled with responsibility and thought and intention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that you just go, okay, I'm here, let's do this.
Right. Okay, well, I didn't have any other questions for you. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on today, Carrie, and I'm sure everyone will leave their thoughts in the comment section below.
Thank you for having me.
If you like the work that I do on this channel, there are donation options in the description box below. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.